So hi everyone, my name's Janet and I'm with Vessels of Compassion Global, and we're about to study Esther, and it's chapter 4. My friends have been doing chapters 1, 2 and 3, so it's my turn now. And it's a very interesting chapter. This is the chapter that I call where the rubber meets the road. So this is the place where Esther has got to make a choice from being the pageant queen and winning a beauty contest to being the one who's productive and the one who's purposeful. The beauty contest is now over. Esther entered the palace, chosen for her beauty. You know, she'd been wrapped up in anointing oils for 6 months. She'd been chosen from all these amazing women to live in the palace with King Xerxes. And she must have thought, what an amazing privilege, because she'd been an orphan, raised up by a cousin Mordecai, found herself in a palace against all odds. So life for her had been one of luxury, one of living the high life. And then suddenly in this chapter 4, things are changing. A true character, a calling and a destiny is now about to be challenged and wrestled with by her. If we'll just look for a recap of chapter 3, a death sentence has been given by Haman the Agagite, who really was motivated and used demonic forces to persuade the king to believe that the Jews, even though he didn't mention this group of people by name, were a group of people who were threatening the kingdom. So King Xerxes had given Haman permission and authority to write an edict, to basically write a death sentence against all the Jews in every province. And Xerxes ruled a massive area of the world. He had provinces from India to Ethiopia. So there were many people groups, many people who were Jews who'd been dispersed into those lands who were affected. So it was a time of great mourning. As soon as Mordecai found out the news, he was in sackcloth and ashes. He was rending his clothes. And he must have actually felt slightly responsible for what had happened, because he was the one who refused to bow the knee to foreign gods. He refused to bow the knee to those who were oppressing the Jews. He stood strong in his faith, just as others in the past had. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, who refused to do what the king wanted, again to bow the knee. For Daniel, who refused to bow the knee, he was in the same group of integrity focused people was Mordecai. So he must have felt like, oh my goodness, look what's happened. There he is, mourning, weeping, tearing his clothes because of this death sentence that had been given. One of the eunuchs that served Esther was called Hathach. And he met with Mordecai to find out what had actually happened. And so Mordecai told him about the edict that Haman had served, that all the Jews were going to die. They had a death sentence. And Mordecai also knew that once the edict had been signed and sealed in the king's ring, that it could not be overturned, that this edict stood. So the decree for the destruction, that Hathach had to go back to Esther and relay this message. And he was issued a command by Mordecai to Esther to say, you must make supplication. You must make supplication before the king and plead for the people. And so Esther received this message. Can you imagine the shock after living this luxurious life, you know, languishing and enjoying everything laid on before her? Suddenly she gets the news that this is about to happen to her people. and she replied with a message to Mordecai. She said, everyone knows the law, that if any man or woman tries to enter the inner court and goes before the king without his request, then the one thing can happen. The law says that that person must be put to death, except the one who the king extends his scepter to, that they may live. But she was fully aware that she'd not even been called to the king for 30 days. And she knew that she was in great danger if she attempted to go before the king of losing her own life. And we don't really know how far on into a marriage that she was at this point. It could have been quite early days, where she may have even been wondering why he'd not called her for 30 days. We don't know what their relationship was like and how secure she felt in that. But up to this point, life had been good. That's what we know. But at this point, the beauty contest is now over, and that Esther has to decide what to do in this situation. The reason for God choosing her to be queen was not for her own comfort. And this is one of the life lessons that I've learned from the book of Esther, that God is more interested in our character and in our calling than in our comfort. It's a very important life lesson. Sometimes we can get complacent when God's saved us, He blesses us, He prospers us, and we can get into a place where we just enjoy that life, but we've forgotten that there's a call of God on our lives, that He's called us to be salt and light in the world and to represent Him in the kingdom that we live in as ambassadors for Jesus. God had placed Esther into Mordecai's care after being orphaned to learn God's ways of integrity, purpose, honour and courage. She knew the godly ways to conduct herself, and God never wastes these teachings. He uses them. When we know about righteousness and justice, then God will call on us to be the purveyors of those gifts. And these are life lessons for us, that it is not about being complacent with privilege and prosperity, but serving God. And so in verse 15, Mordecai responded when Esther had sent this message to say, well, you know that if I go before the king, I could die. And in Esther chapter 4, verse 13, it's a famous verse. Mordecai told them to answer Esther when the eunuch Hathach had gone back to speak to Mordecai. He said, Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He called out that destiny and purpose. He called out the fact that if she was silent, that God would send another deliverer. And we've seen this in the history of the Jewish people right from the beginning, that God called out deliverers. He called out people like Moses. He called out Jesus, obviously. But He also calls us to be deliverers. He calls us to do the same thing that Esther did. Another life lesson which is important in this season that we're in is that anti-Semitism is once again arising. And so are oppressions against the church. And do we sit like Esther originally did, basking in the blessings that God has given us and stay quiet and let other people fight? Or do we take our position on the wall as watchmen? And I hope that this message will challenge us all to really seek God, to ask, What do you want me to do in this situation? Just as Esther had to lay her life on the line, and for us to be like those in Genesis chapter 12, where God says, if you bless my people, I'll bless you. But if you curse my people, then you will be cursed. And that silence colludes with those who are cursing. So we do have a responsibility as believers to speak out and to align ourselves with the plans of God for Israel. So Esther made that choice. She decided that she knew she had to go before the king, and she knew the risks, and she sent a message back to say, if I perish, I perish. She decided in her heart to do the right thing. But she wasn't foolhardy. She didn't just rush into the king. She knew that this required fasting and prayer. So she also sent a message out to all the provinces, to all the Jewish people, to fast and to pray for 3 days. Not only did they fast from food, but from drink for 3 days, which is quite a challenge. Esther took this seriously because she knew in wisdom that she needed God on her side. She needed to humble herself before she could even think about entering into the palace. And so we leave this chapter at the end of chapter 4, that Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him, that he advised the people to fast and to pray. And so I love that Mordecai and Esther had such a relationship that Mordecai was well pleased, you can imagine, with Esther's decision to do the right thing. And we'll see when the next person does chapter 5 what actually happens there. So I hope this has blessed you, and I hope it's challenged you like it challenged me. And I'm going to leave that study there, but thank you so much for listening. God bless.